Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the summit, the second session post a coffee break. As promised, in this session, we're going to continue our fireside chats, but now we're going to talk about iconic projects that have changed the shape and the face of the GCC region. And we're going to start this session with Mr. Ali Mangera, who is the owner of Maya Architects. That's MYAA Architects. Just so you know, Maya Architects were behind the construction of the Qatar Faculty of Islamic Studies. And there's also a big project in Jeddah that is currently in the planning phase that Maya Architects is looking at. Ladies and gentlemen, Maya Architects has won so many awards, so many accolades. When Mr. Mangera was telling me about the awards and accolades, I said to myself, man, if I have to tell all of this to you, I'd probably be standing here the entire night. So many things to look forward to. And today, Mr. Mangera is going to be talking about how do you go about building contemporary buildings, keeping in mind the local traditions and customs of the land that you're operating in. So I shall not hold you back any further. Mr. Ali Mangera, the stage is over to you. I'm sure everybody is very eager to hear what is it that you have to say. Victor?
Good evening, good afternoon. Thanks very much for having us. Thanks for the introduction. Okay, so we're architects based in London. We also have an office in Spain, but we've been working in Qatar since 2008. This is a project we've just recently completed. It's the Qatar Faculty of Islamic Studies. If you know it, it's located near the Sidra Hospital, near the roundabout. So we got started with the design in 2008. And really it was to create something which was a little bit special. It's one of the first indigenous universities on the Education City campus. So it had to be something a little bit special, a little bit unique. The main program is about creating learning space, so it's a university, alongside praying space, so there's a mosque attached to it. How we developed the idea. In Islam, there is a kind of a relationship between prayer and learning. It is incumbent on a Muslim to seek knowledge. So the building, the idea for the building is essentially an infinite loop between learning and between the prayer space. So there are many paths through the building, and you can always go between the faculty and the mosque. The other main sort of idea behind this project is also to change perceptions and preconceptions about this type of building. Historically, Islamic buildings or mosque or teaching spaces followed a kind of a very traditional route. The thing is that a lot of these buildings are also regional and cultural. So what you might understand to be a mosque, let's say in early Arabic architecture, is different to how it's interpreted in India, and again different to how it's interpreted in China or Turkey. What we're trying to say with this slide is that there is no one solution. There are many solutions, and these solutions come out of culture, identity, and the image and the direction your community is heading. Idea of Islamic architecture and to try to create something which is at the same time contemporary, but also traditional at the same time. How do you do that? This is one of the main courtyards of the building, which has verses from the Quran. So it's a very contemporary courtyard, but again, it's overlaid with traditional verses from the Quran, which kind of appeal and address the local audience. We're also changing the perception of how ladies and men can interface with each other. So the prayer space is also accessible to ladies, and I think this, for the Arabic world, is quite an achievement. And I think it's very important that women in this society are not only educated but allowed to participate on an equal basis with their male colleagues. And I have to say that Qatar Foundation, and in Qatar in particular, they are really ahead of the curve. How we developed the project, we started looking, although it looks like a very contemporary building, we started to analyze very traditional buildings of performing the same function. So here we've got a building in Egypt, which is the Sultan Hassan. Then we've got other examples from around the Muslim world. Essentially, the light blue is the teaching space, and the dark blue is the prayer space. So what we did was that we unpicked the arrangement, how you unpick the prayer space and how you can reposition it. So although it looks like a very contemporary building, actually the ideas are more or less from a very old set of principles. Reinventing certain established ideas. So here we have a dome, and how we then reinterpret it using tiling, using panels, using ceramics in a very contemporary way. Inside of the dome, how ablution is it's very underrated in a lot of buildings, because ablution is a very key moment. It's a moment where you are going from an outside space, you're cleansing yourself, and then you are in a spiritual space. So this moment of transition, I think, is a very critical moment. And I think how some of the historical buildings, for example, in Istanbul, are interpreting this, are quite powerful. And I think we try to do something similar in this building. We have an enormous staircase which runs maybe 5 stories with water coming down, and it's kind of a symbolic separation of the faculty to the mosque. Also, you create these microclimates, these gardens around the building. The typical kind of layout of the project. I won't go into too much detail, but the library is in a nice place overlooking the campus, the mosque on the other side, and then you've got the faculty offices. And so this building is going up and up in different levels. One of the key spaces is the entrance. I'll come to that now. As you approach the building, it's lifted on the 5 pillars of Islam, which have calligraphy on them, and it creates this very cool undercroft space. So symbolically, the building is lifted, and it has a cascade of water coming through it, and it feels like a very cool, refreshing place to be. So these are the 5 pillars with the calligraphy on them. And some of the pillars of people. This is one of the most popular buildings on the campus because obviously it's a mosque. So people are coming there from outside, and also people are just coming just to look at and explore the building. The other things we did, we created within the building themes or areas which pick up on the history or the anthology of Islamic civilization, let's say. So we looked at the Arabic period, the Umayyad period, the Egyptian Islamic period, the Spanish period, around the world, India. And so the building is broken up into little themes, and then within that we display images of historical buildings. So it's a way for the students not only to be educated about, they're studying law and economics and religion in the building, but also that they can be educated about their culture. The second ribbon is the ribbon of calligraphy and ayahs from the Quran. So they run from the masjid right up to the minarets, and a very visible expression. These are some of the corridors. We took maybe 90 photographs of key monuments around the world, and then we digitized them and created these panels, relief panels. What's really important when you are designing contemporary education space is not to think about classrooms and a place where you just sit there and are expected to sit there and the teacher teaches you. It's how students are mixing, how different students are coming into the building, what sort of atmosphere you're getting, how you can create incidental encounters and meetings. And through that, you can generate new ideas so students can get enlightened in that process. These are kind of ideas that are also explored in some of the universities, historical universities in England. So, for example, in Cambridge, you'd have the circulation spaces are quite important, historical spaces, there's big staircases where students can mix. And so in our project, the mixing spaces are very important. How you can create spaces which are just incidental and you can have a conversation with your friends. The layout of the classrooms is organized around courtyards. Again, each courtyard has a theme. So courtyard and classroom, looking at the 5 pillars in this case. Some of the things we had to do were quite conventional as well. So although we have a very contemporary building, there are obviously needs that we need to address in how students can come together. But essentially these are very, very flexible spaces. So you might see seats or you might see no seats. Exhibition space. Another thing you'll probably notice, or you'll probably wonder why everything is very white, inside is very white, and it's deliberately so, because idea is that the people, the students, are the ones that add the color and the vibrancy, and we chose a very neutral palette in order for that to happen. Some of the faculty offices, the library. So we have this ceiling. This is, if you're an interior designer, it's a kind of a enormous ceiling which is coming down and then lighting in between. So it's not a very difficult thing to do, but it's kind of an interesting, you create an interesting dynamic in the space. And kind of you're not just looking at the floor, but you're drawn to the ceiling. Some of the auditorium spaces, a cafe. To talk about the courtyard. So the main courtyard at the front before you go to the mosque, and then the courtyard with the calligraphy at the back. This is the entrance, relate the inside with the outside to create very natural mixing of two spaces. This is during Eid, I think it's Eid last year. This is the main prayer space. Behind here you have this cascade of water, which is where the ablution takes place. And here is the library in the mosque. If you have time, you should go see it, because the building is open to the public, and you can go on a Friday or you can go any day in the week and just experience it. These are some of the staircases, which are all very sculptural. The ablution. We're trying to balance this and try to. I mean, there are some issues that we're kind of finalizing. But this whole wall, it's like a mesh, very fine mesh, has water coming down 4 stories. So when you're inside that space, the staircase going up the building, it's an amazing experience of the water coming through. So you're like in a vessel with water, but walking up some stairs. It's something that's never been done. So here, one of the areas where we actually started to use color, and so this is kind of using gold leaf. We gave a real focus to the mihrab and created that as a kind of the main centerpiece of the mosque. These are just some of the ideas that are underlying ideas that have gone through the project. How we created the calligraphy, how we built it, because small things like if you have the calligraphy on the outside and then the sun comes through, and then if you're walking, you might be walking on the letters from the Quran, so you have to create a diffusion, you have to break the pattern of light So we have a secondary screen that does that. So lots of little things have gone into this thing. No pieces arriving during the construction sequence. Construction process. The whole building had to be wind tunnel tested, so it was quite a feat. And there are dampers kind of halfway through to stop the wind kind of wrecking the building. But it was a great engineering achievement from our structural engineers. Arab did a tremendous job. So even things like the gardens are kind of based on an Islamic metaphor. So a traditional Arabic garden, or if you look at a Moroccan garden, for example, is a 4-part Islamic garden. And the gardens normally have water, and the 4 rivers of paradise, river of wine, or alcohol, whatever it's called, water, milk, and honey. So these are the 4 rivers. So we have these 4 rivers running through the project, which then break up the landscape. And also we have 4 gardens around the building. So on this side, a garden of knowledge where you can sit outside and learn, read your books, and have a dialogue with the neighboring building. And then a garden at the rear with you can sit down and it's like an outdoor lecture theatre. And then another 2 gardens on the side. That's night view. So here you can see one of the sort of gardens at the back, the gardens of art, of Islamic art. So idea really is to, this landscape is not mature now, it's much more developed in a sense. So, but really to create these pockets of spaces and spaces which are intriguing for the students and for visitors. So it's this time of the year, it's a really good time to go, maybe even in a few weeks' time, because you can enjoy the gardens and really be outside. Some of the outdoor landscaping. This pattern that you see on the, I'll come to that in a minute, but it's very carefully calibrated. So the light in the building doesn't, you get natural daylight, but not solar heat gain. So the whole facade has been modulated to allow for that to happen. We started by looking at how you can, it's really simple just to have an Islamic pattern and say, oh, well, you have a pattern. But how a pattern can change, how it can evolve across the building. So we started looking at how patterns can morph and one pattern can become another, which I think could lead to other solutions. And this is a kind of a typical tiling model. So the building went through kind of a very advanced parametric analysis where we obviously had to build the building and the concept. In order to do that, we had to run it through these scripting computers and work out where the stresses are, how the panels are going to work. And then from that, the drawings and the 3D model can then be given to the fabricator. So the gap between design and construction is kind of merged. A little bit like some of the ideas that some of your colleagues were talking about earlier. Some of the construction images, we had, I think, 4,000 people working on site at any one time. Tiling from the tower crane. These are just like evocative images because, these were just taken as we were walking through the site, but I think it's kind of poetic because it shows how the process of building was and how that process then, just that moment, that pausing moment is kind of quite powerful, I think, because it's saying something about the region we're in. Okay, so that's the Qatar faculty. I'm going to show you another project we're working on in Jeddah, which is, I have to go quite quickly, but it's quite large. It's in a design phase. It's behind the Kingdom Tower. It's Jeddah Creek. We're interested in organic spaces, how to bring a master plan to life using nature. were inspired by places like Central Park in New York, and how you can bring these ideas and create pedestrian routes, which are green pedestrian routes, yet at the same time have the density you need to create an urban matrix. So here we have very high-rise buildings, hotels, offices. On this side you have a souk. But again, all the time you have very narrow, compressed green routes. So it's a very pedestrianized city, whole district pedestrianized. And this is quite lacking in the Middle East, because you have cities which are very car-friendly, but not so much pedestrian-friendly. Some of the inspirations behind the buildings, how you can not necessarily replicate nature, but how nature can come into the project. Some of the interiors we're doing. I think that's it. So I'm on time. Thank you. I think we started in 2011, and it sort of finished 2015, 4 years. I can't, because it's not even something I know. But it's not what you think, because we were very fortunate to have a client that wanted something powerful for that part of the education city. But the scheme is extremely rational. And if you understand about the efficiency of spaces, where you have a really high efficiency of spaces within it, then you have to factor in that there's a mosque element to it. So the mosques normally in the region are a little bit ostentatious. So it has so many functions that you can't just measure it as saying, well, it's a faculty. It's a really efficient scheme which brings in people who are not students, and has a really great remit than just education.
We have time for one more question. Please briefly introduce yourself and then ask your question.
Hi, my name is Farry. I'm from FHSI Architects. I've just got a question about have you guys done any evaluation in terms of your end user using that mosque? Because it doesn't look like a mosque. What do they feel?
The mosque is absolutely packed. Every week it's packed.
I understand the pack part, but I want to know what would they feel then going to Hagia Sophia compared to this one that doesn't look like a mosque?
That's the first question we put up on the image, because what is a mosque? And I think it's a kind of a question you need to ask yourself, because part of the remit, it's an education city campus building, so it's to educate people and make them aware of Islam, of what a mosque might be. And what is a mosque anyway? I mean, if you strip away all the architecture, it's something as simple as, you're outside without anything and close your eyes and you make your prayer, right? So I think we need to get to the point where we question, otherwise we will never progress. I bet if you looked at some of the amazing mosques that you see in Turkey, when they did the first one, I mean, Hagia Sophia is actually a basilica, but it was expropriated to a mosque. When they used that, I mean, probably people thought, what's that? I'm in a church, so I think people get used to things and they need to be challenged, because architects treat people as if they're silly a lot of the times, and I think people are not silly, and they need something which is inspiring.
Yep. So we're a little bit out of time, but I just have one question, if you guys don't mind. At any stage during this project, did you ever face a situation that you were running short of supplies? Was procurement a challenge for you? We saw the interiors, there were tables, chairs. Were you able to get all of the supplies on time? Did everything happen on schedule? Or was procurement in any way a challenge for you at any stage?
It's always a challenge, because as architects we are quite strong, we're quite opinionated in what we want, what we would accept, but we have to be realistic. If you ask the procurement question, the building has very high sustainability, and that means that we are required to source materials within a 200-kilometer or 200-mile radius. So that helped in a bit, because buildings have different sustainability ratings. This one has quite a high rating, and it's really to do with the supply chain. So I think if you plan in advance and you know what you want and you're determined, you can get it done. And we didn't have too many problems, but obviously there are issues that you just have to deal with in any project.
Thank you. Thank you very much.